Hello and welcome back to the Jump Show. We're making a quick fire return to the Cheltenham scene. This is just to get into a routine of uploading on a Tuesday rather than a Thursday, obviously hence the Tuesday upload. In this week's episode, we're going to be discussing Constitution Hill's performance from the weekend and how it's affected our views towards the Supreme. And we're also on the subject, we'll also just talk about the Supreme, plus Gordon Elliott having a bundle of runners come over to England as well. Jake, how are you doing? How was your weekend?
Not very good on the punting wise, but other than that, very good. Nice to see Gordon's got all of his in, trying to fish for some handicap marks. Really feels like Cheltenham's getting going now.
And Dan, how about yourself? Any punts?
No, mate, very quiet. Literally, I've got the January kind of blues on the punting aspect, to be honest. It's kind of all battened down the hatches until the Dublin Racing Festival in Cheltenham, really. But other than that, nice, relaxing, and ready to crack on with more Cheltenham talk.
Lovely stuff. So as I said, we'll kick things off with the Supreme Novice Hurdle. We did touch on this race briefly in the last episode, which you haven't seen already, and you should definitely go and check it out. It was a good one. And I suppose there's only one place to start, and that's going to be Constitution Hill's devastating performance. I'll start with you, Dan. I know you like him. You made the very bold move as calling him your eye catcher from the weekend. Give us a brief rundown of the performance.
Inspired selection, that one, wasn't it? To be fair, it's not many people would have seen that coming. But I mean, look, it's hard to not to be impressed when he backs it up and does it again in very contrasting conditions. Obviously, first time out, very good on the clock, beat a very fair yardstick in my eye. The question always is going to be, when you go back to heavy ground, can you back that kind of performance up? And he duly did. Again, the time was very, very solid. I think it was a couple of seconds quicker than the juvenile hurdle earlier on the card. It was like 11 seconds quicker than the handicap. And I think probably more impressively was the fact he was a second quicker and 2.5 seconds quicker, respectively, than the juvenile and the handicap winner from 2 out to the line, which demonstrates quite a strange level of speed and a turn of foot in heavy conditions, which not many horses possess. So to be able to do that is quite striking, really, and it's not surprising that he's been cut to favourite, because for all that we can often get carried away with heavy ground Tolworth hurdle form, this horse does look a bit out of the ordinary.
Jake, that was a fantastic summary of the race. Did you have any further comments on Constitution Hill?
Not in terms of the performance. As everyone saw, it was very good. He jumped well, quickened up nicely. It was very easy work. If you're looking at RPRs, then he recorded an RPR of 151, which actually beats John Bond's 149 from his Kennel Gate victory. So again, that's another pro in his column. And if you're going to weigh them up against each other, if you were putting pros and cons against the top 3 in the Supreme, then obviously Constitution Hill's the one would have the least cons against him right now. I think something else that Nicky Henderson has since said is that he may go to the Contenders Hurdle next as like one last run before Cheltenham. It's a bit of a shame he may end up having all 3 starts at Sandown. It would have been nice to see him go left-handed or go to a different track just to get a different feel of it. But at this moment in time, he's the worthy Supreme favourite.
We'll move on to his stablemate John Bond. 2 very different horses. Obviously, Constitution Hill's very laid back, and John Bond's more of a buzzy horse. I personally have warmed a lot more to Constitution Hill than John Bond, mainly because of the falsely run starts in John Bond's races. He gets worked up pre and post race. And with a look towards Cheltenham, I would be worried about John Bond handling the occasion, not just the big loud crowd, but also the possibility of a false start, which seems to happen every year, although I didn't actually go back and look. I do feel like that happens a lot, especially in those novice races. So Jake, with John Bond, how much of his price is based on ability, and how much of that is going to be based on his reputation, his owners, the trainer, the breeding?
Well, I mean, we see it every time he runs, don't we, that he opens up for a ridiculously short price. The last couple of times he's actually drifted out before the off, hasn't he, and then kind of been smashed in again, right before the off. I think there's obviously a lot of reputation there. The green and gold hoops, lots of ones next to his name. People are going to get excited about that on the day as well. Your fair weather punters, your people that just go into Cheltenham, etc. But he's clearly got the ability as well. That Kennel Gate victory, the form is probably arguably better than the Tolworth. The horses in behind, you've got LS Bell. You've got some nice horses in there. So you can't really argue about his ability. He's definitely got ability. It's just, as you say, at this time, Constitution Hill looks like the one that people, he's easier to warm to because he's got that, less well-known connections, and he's the manner of his two performances were just, more liking, I guess, the way that he's just quickened up and sprinted away from the field. You're always going to be attracted to those types. So yeah, I mean, he's clearly got ability that's clearly hyped for his price as well, but he's a worthy position in the market.
And Dan, obviously you said then you are a fan of Constitution Hill. Do you hold the same sort of concerns about John Bon as myself?
Well, it was made a big deal of, I think, on his first hurdle start. Obviously, he went to the Newbury Gallops Day, and there were numerous reports of how sweaty he was beforehand and how kind of unruly he almost was. But today, I don't really think he's been that bad once it's actually come to race day. Like, it's been nowhere near as bad in his first two hurdle starts as we probably would have believed it could have been based on those reports from the Gallops Day. And if anything, I think he is slowly maturing in that aspect. Now, 80,000 people at Cheltenham is going to be very different to what he's encountered thus far, and it is going to be much more intense, and that is going to raise questions about his temperament. But I think maybe it has been slightly overplayed to a certain extent, and I think, as Jake said, I think his performances, the form is arguably deeper than what Constitution Hill has done. Now, the time figures for Constitution Hill has been probably what's been the standout, and I think markets and Ante-post punters are now far more in tune with those kind of things, especially with the depth of analysis, the likes of Simon Rowlands, the time form guys, all those do on the times and all those kind of things. So I think the markets are more clued up on that than they probably used to be, which is probably why the price is where it is. And I think almost John Bon's reputation now is almost secondary to what he's achieving and the style he is achieving it in. I mean, he brushed aside Colonel Mustard, who's rated 144 when he came over to England. Admittedly, it was a slowly run race, and unlike Constitution Hills, you wouldn't really be raving about the pure figures of the race itself. But the manner is very impressive. He's a very slick jumper. There's a lot to like about him. In fact, Timeform actually have John Bon rated superior to Constitution Hill, which I find interesting. They're both, John Bon is 149 with a big P. Constitution Hill is 147 with a big P as well. So it's not much in it, but it's a fascinating comparison between the two. It promises to be a fascinating race and also a betting heat right up to the last, to be honest. It could go either way.
Before we move on to Sir Gerhard, we know that Nicky Henderson isn't afraid to run Tour de Sem race, especially not on Supreme. He has done in recent years. Now, they do have separate owners, so you would imagine that they're both going to run in Supreme. But could you see one of them stepping up in Trip, and which one would it be? And I'll go to you, Jake.
Firstly, no, I couldn't. But if you were saying that one of them was going to, then Constitution Hill would probably have to be the one, to be honest. He's obviously, he would have won his point to point. I don't know if you've ever watched it back, but he just mucks up the last and just walks through it. And then he nearly gets back up again towards the line. So, he stays further than 2 miles, but, eventually he will stay further than 2 miles if needs be. But again, if he's going to go to Contenders Hurdle next over 2 miles, then I would really want to see him over 2.5 before the Ballymore. One horse who I can remember who did do that, who only ran over 2 miles, was Neon Wolf a couple of years ago. He was only just beaten in the race, but it doesn't happen very often where a horse runs over 2 miles the whole season and then just steps up for the Ballymore. I think that's probably a bit far-fetched, but as I said, I don't think either of them will step up and Trip, and I think they'll take each other on.
I do remember that race really well, beaten by Willoughby Court. And Dan, in a few words, stepping up in Trip, and who would it be?
I can't see either of them, to be honest. I don't think it would make sense. Based on his more professional demeanour, you'd say Constitution Hill would be the one to step up. There's surely no way John Bon goes further than 2 miles really anytime soon, based on what we've seen. But based on what we've seen so far, I would be hard-pressed to say that either should be stepping up at this time.
Okay. So we did speak about Sir Gerhard in the last video, so we won't talk about him for too long. He obviously hasn't achieved as much as the other two over hurdles, but he obviously hasn't had the opportunity to. He has most probably got more track experience than them, obviously, from his bumper days. I really quite like him. I expected to go to the Dublin Racing Festival and win. He was shortened by quite a bit. I know me and you both had a similar opinion on him, Jake. Have you changed your mind on Sir Gerhard after this weekend?
No, because the potential's still there. No matter what Constitution has done, it's still the potential of Sir Gerhard that we're looking at here. I do think that there's a potential that he might run in the Grade 2 Moscow Flyer at Punchestown in a couple of weekends instead of the Dublin Racing Festival, because there's quite a lot of ground concerns coming out of Ireland at the minute. about how it's going to come up quite good ground at the Dublin Racing Festival, which isn't going to help anyone. So fingers crossed we get some rain over there. But if we're not looking like we're going to get any of that rain, then the Moscow Fly has been used for like Duvan, Min, Valtor, all of those ones to go to the Supreme. Well, he hasn't used it as much recently, probably due to the Dublin Racing Festival now being there. But yeah, I think that might be an option for him. But yeah, it'll be a case of waiting and seeing what he does there, really, in either that race or the Dublin Racing Festival, wherever he turns up.
And Dan, I'm sure it'll feel like you're repeating yourself from the last video, but a few words on Sir Gerhard.
Yeah, I echo your sentiments. Really, we know his bumper form is top class. For all that maybe Kilcrooks let it down slightly, we know he's a top grade performer. He hasn't achieved as much as the other two at the top of the Supreme market. As you say, he hasn't had a chance to. Like, his hurdles debut was absolutely fine. It achieved a fairly good RPR based on for a debut. It was a slick enough jumper on it, so a lot to like. And yeah, you just want to see him doing it again, really, before you start being overly confident about his chances when you've seen the likes of the Nicky Anderson pair.
And I'll just ask you all, if you had to play one of them today, who would your bet be in the race? And I'll go to you, Dan.
It's probably the most pressing question of the Cheltenham Festival at the minute. I'd say just Constitution Hill. There's not much in it at all. I think John Bon might drift on a day. I
personally would play Sir Gerhard myself, just because I can see him shortening quite drastically in the market, and I'd actually lay John Bon out the three of them. Jake, who would yours be?
Yeah, the price is Sir Gerhard. But if you took prices out of it, it'd probably be Constitution Hill.
Okay. Jake, I'll be shooting straight back to you again. Your selection from the last video ran this weekend, Britzka. I missed the race, unfortunately, but despite losing, I did read in the chat, you two seemed fairly optimistic still. Would you give your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, look, it wasn't an ideal run, let's be honest. It was a quick turnaround from his run at Leopardstown over Christmas, so you've got to take that into account. I can't imagine Gordon was very happy that he was punted into favoritism for the Boodles before he even ran either. But it was a pretty average performance. Like, he jumped quite nicely, which was good to see. He didn't really make any mistakes at the jumpings, but he just never got into the race. Davey never really looked happy. He never quickened like he had in the last couple of races to get back onto the leaders' tails, and he just finished in fourth without really kicking up much fuss. So it's not ideal, but if you look back, Aramax was beaten in the race, Vanera Charm was beaten in the race, so it's not the end of the world. And that there'll be another, he'll probably go somewhere else now between now and Cheltenham, and hopefully he runs a lot better and gives his chances a bit of a boost. But yeah, it wasn't ideal, but it's not the end of the world.
That was actually his third run in quick succession, wasn't it? I think I looked, he ran twice in December. So to make that the third run must have been really difficult. Did we miss anything there, Dan, or have you got any more thoughts on him at all?
No, like Jake said, he never looked happy. But I think from an early stage, you could see he just wasn't quite travelling with the zest you'd like to see him to. It was always going to be an awkward spot, really, with that race. You almost didn't want him to win based on you don't want him to overexpose their mark. That would have been 2 wins in 3 starts, and horses with that kind of record don't have a great track record in the Fred Winter. So it was always going to be an awkward spot. This was definitely on the more disappointing end of the scale in terms of how he performed. But there are reasons to forgive it. I think it was probably an overreaction to go out to 33-1, like Bet365 had. But then again, it was probably an overreaction to cut him into like 10, 8-1, based on the Uppy and the Ante boys both putting him up. So it's been an absolute roller coaster of a ride if you've been back in Britzka this last week. But hope is not lost yet. He still has a decent profile for the race. Yeah, he's no forlorn hope yet, that's for sure.
Okay, before we get into the selections, we did want to talk about Gordon Elliott this weekend. He has something like 20 runners coming over, most of them for the Pertemps qualifier, because if I'm not mistaken, there isn't another qualifier for them in Ireland. And then I assume the rest will be coming over here to get a mark. I'll pass it over to the pair of you, as I didn't look at it. Dan, I believe you looked at his Kempton runners.
Yes, and it's worth pointing out, obviously, these are all at the 5-day entry stage. It's almost certain that most of these aren't going to come over, but it's a purely a chess match looking for what marks some of his horses are going to get, and then you can by proxy figure out what others are going to get. So a brief rundown of the Kempton ones are entered at the 5-day stage. the juvenile hurdle, you've got Iberic de Soy and Dr. Churchill. The former, who was in that Britzka race, performed fairly okay. They're both Fred Winter types. I doubt they'll be running here. They've got form that ties into the likes of White Pepper, Lunar Power, and Dr. Churchill actually beat Champion Green, who is right ahead of the Fred Winter market. So it's interesting to see what kind of mark he will be given. Then you've got Glenn Lowe in the 2.5 mile handicap, second in the Potemps in 2018. He's been talked up as a Kim Muir horse every season since that. Like, he's always been at the head of that market every year, and he's never made it there. He's now 11. He's clearly been delicate. He's marked 129 in Ireland, so you'd think he might have a decent chance of getting into a Kim Muir if they're going to go down this route. And as an Elliott and JP horse, you can never discount him in a Kim Muir, but it's maybe the case that his time is gone for that kind of a race. Then he's got 3 in the 3 mile handicap. Deaf Duty, also 11, also fragile. He was midfield in the plate off 151 a couple of seasons ago, ran no sort of race twice last season, but came back with a much better run in the Paddy Power last time out. And he has plenty of back class to recommend him as well. So his Irish mark is 139. He'd be interesting if he could turn up somewhere. Smoking Gun won the Porterstown off 130, now 138 in Ireland. Gordon actually said after the race that he'd be looking at the Irish National, but before that he could run in the Kim Muir. And he hasn't actually been talked up that much, maybe because he's a bit more exposed than people like their Kim Muir horses to be. But he's an interesting one, definitely fishing for a mark with him before deciding if they're going to go the Cheltenham route. And the other one, probably the most interesting one, is Brayside. He's got a mark of 145 in Ireland, so it's almost certain that he's not going to run in the Kim Muir based on the 0 to 145 ceiling. But I think he's a dark horse for National Hunt Chaser to go down that route. He was decent horse last year. He's a second season novice. He ran behind some good horses last season, but looks much better this year. Won the Cork Grand National of 133, and then was 4th in the Paddy Power Chase, where he was staying on strongly at the finish over 3 miles, which is a trip probably short of his optimum. I think the 3 mile 6 round Cheltenham would suit, especially if the ground would be closer to soft. He's 25 for that race currently. He might be one for none, run a no bet, because they might go to the Irish National with him, because that looks right up his street. And then finally, to end this massively long rant, but I think these are all worth noting for sure, based on the trader himself alone. There's 2 in the 2 mile handicap it comes with as well. One's Mars Harper. He's fairly exposed at this stage. He's ran 12 times since May. He's been on the go a long time. Probably more interested is Top Bandit. He's 3 out of 4 over hurdles. He beat Brawson, who bolted up in a handicap recently off 117, and Jetois, who was second in the Tolworth back at Cheltenham in October. He's rated 135 in Ireland, only raced over 2 miles thus far. Looks like a step up and trip might help him. He could end up being a type 1 for the Martin Pipe or something down the line. But that's a quick synopsis. Well, not very quick, but a quick rundown of the entries at Kempton.
Also found a nice drinking game for us there. Take a shot every time Dan says the words Kim Muir, and you'll come away absolutely bladdered for the last 5
Well, don't
minutes.
watch all these videos in a row then, because God almighty, there's going to be more references put on this series is finished, that's for sure.
And Jake, I think you looked at Warwick, mainly the Potemps qualifier.
Yeah, so in classic style, Gordon's entered 9 horses in the Potemps qualifier at Warwick on Saturday. There's obviously no chance they're all running, but let's just go through them anyway. So the one that I was really hoping would be entered, and I spoke to Dan about this at the weekend, was Mr. Fred Rogers. He's a novice hurdler, but he was third to Ginto and Eric Burdack's a couple of starts ago. He's won over 3 miles since. But unfortunately, he's been installed as like 12 to 1 best price for the Potemps. So not really giving me much hope at I don't really want to get involved at that price at the minute. He's also in the Grade 2 Leamington Novices Hurdle, which is a 2 mile 5 furlong grade novice hurdle. So he could run there as well and blow his mark anyway. So he's just one to keep an eye on and to leave this weekend, but just see what happens. Other than that, he's got Ard Hill, who bolted up at Ascot the other day when you were there, Willo. He won off 104 that day. So he's going to have to really move up the handicap ratings if he's going to want to get into the Potemps final. But he's entered up. There's also Chemical Energy. He's been installed as 20 to 1 for the Potemps. He beat Lunar Display last time out, which is actually a decent piece of form. There's Grand Roi, who ran in the Coral Cup last year off a mark of 149. I'm assuming he's going to be a bit too high for the Potemps, but you never know. Again, hasn't really tried 3 miles either. So other than the Crystal Hurdle where he's well beaten. So yeah, just one to keep an eye on. IA Connect has been quite consistent this season, but again, he's rated 131 in Ireland, not really tried 3 miles yet. Sergio Burles is in there. He's rated 157 in Ireland, so I think there's absolutely no chance he's going to get in win-up attempt off what we're talking like 160 plus probably. And then there's 3 others that are in there that are all already qualified. So Dunboyne, Volcano, and Tullybeg. They're all just fishing for marks. So if you fancy any of them, have a look and see what they get tomorrow.
Okay, selection time. There you go, week 2 selections. I don't know about you guys, but I'm already struggling for selections right now. I remember having the same problem last year. We got to about 3 weeks in, I'd run out of horses to back. Dan, we'll kick off with you. Second selection for the video.
Technically my third
selection,
pedantic,
sorry. Yeah.
But sorry, I've thrown you out of sync for doing 2 in the first episode. I know you can't count that well, so it's
cheers.
My bad. You're more than welcome, mate. So yeah, I've gone for the Ballymore because I think it's a very open race as things stand. You've got Journey with Me, who's favourite, which I can't really have as favourite, to be honest. He beat Manila Crooner on Hurdle's debut. A Gordon Elliott horse who's probably not at the top of his ranks. There's talk that Journey with Me is going to go to the 2 mile 6 race at Dublin Racing Festival, and they've been talking about him as if he's more of a stayer. So I think there's still every chance he could end up in the Albert Bartlett. And you've got Ginto, who won the Laws of Nace. He's likely to go straight to Cheltenham. Again, you'd think Ballymore's more likely based on recent Laws of Nace form, but he's more of a stayer as well. Maybe he could go to the Albert Bartlett too. Then if you look at others who are around the 10 to 1 or less market in the market, you've got Sir Gerhard and Constitution Hill. I doubt either of them will come here. Mighty Potter and John Bonner are around that same price as well. They won't run. Mighty Potter's probably a maybe at best. Stage Star, he won the Challow. That's almost cursed when you look to the Ballymore. Like, I'm happy to put a line through him for all that he was impressive that day. So a brave man game, and he got put in his place. And then there's Dysert Dynamo, who I'm a big fan of, but his price keeps shortening, and his preparation's getting almost worse by the day. Like, you wanted to see him in the Laws of Nace, really. That was the race people thought he was going to go for. I mean, the entries to the Dublin Racing Festival are going to be out, I think, on the 12th of January. And you'd imagine maybe he goes for the 2 mile 6 race, which I don't think that's necessarily ideal preparation. So I'm a bit unsure about him at single figure price when his prep race has probably been and gone. So I think this race is really looking for a standout or just something to emerge. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a punt on Gerri Colombe at 25 to 1. I think he's the lurker in this market currently, and I think he's been very much under the radar. Like, he's Rob Corr's other potential runner other than Journey with Me, but he's Elliott trained. I think only Sir Gerhard achieved a higher time form rating when Gerri Colombe bolted up on his bumper debut. Go back and watch that. He absolutely hacked away by 24 lengths, like a really visually impressive performance. And he followed that up with another very easy win, giving £12 to a runner-up in a slow race, but again, cantered away quite nicely. He made his hurdling debut on St. Stephen's Day, over 2.5 miles at Down Royal. Again, I think because there's so much racing on at that time, there's not really been much talk about his performance at all, and I think that's kind of helping his price at this stage. But to me, it was a really impressive run. He travelled really well, he jumped nicely, and he quickened up, more importantly, once he was actually asked to go about his business and put the race to bed fairly quickly. He beat a horse called Eiley Rose, who by a comfortable 8 lengths, definitely not really extended beyond a few nudges towards the home straight, and he was giving her £15. Now, she actually finished just 6 lengths behind Hollow Games, and she was only getting £7 that day earlier in the season. So admittedly, it's different conditions. It's hard to compare distances and the like based on that alone, but it ties them together, and it kind of gives you the impression that Gerri Colombe is a decent horse. And then Eiley Rose actually won at Ayr comfortably the other day, like in a quite facile, beating another horse of Gordon Elliott's. So she's somewhat franked that form a bit. Now, that debut earned him an RPR of 137. So for context, Ginto on Hurdle's debut earned 128. Journey with Me and Dysert Dynamo 139. So Gerhard was 140. So he's up in the top echelons in terms of hurdling debuts this season. And again, it's weird that he's almost so untalked about for a horse that's unbeaten in terms of points, bumpers, and over hurdles. Gordon Elliott trains him, and he costs 240,000. Like, I'm quite shocked that a horse of his profile isn't more prominent probably in the market. It's difficult in this market as well, though, for where horses are necessarily going to go. I mentioned earlier that Journey with Me is Rob Cord owned. They probably go into Dublin Racing Festival with him over 2 mile 6. That again does suggest to me he might be more of an Albert Bartlett type. They've also got Grand Jury, those connections, who was a decent second over 2 miles, but he might go Supreme route. So it's going to be tough to see where Gerri Colombe kind of goes and the balance of things. But my best guess at this stage, I think he might go to the 2 mile 4 grade 3 at Thurles in February. It's not the ideal preparation because I think it only leaves about 3 weeks until the Ballymore, but that's kind of where I see him fitting in. And I do think he's got the pace for 2.5. I don't think he's the kind of horse you want to be stepping up to 3 miles just yet. And if you look at his profile, he's actually got very decent credentials for the Ballymore. He's a 6-year-old. That's the age group that produced the last 8 winners. If you look at horses that have won points and bumpers and are undefeated over hurdles, that's a very solid place to look when looking for the Ballymore winner. And considering he's still available at 25 to 1 in places, I think in a race that is yet to have a standout contender, he might just be the lurker in the market. And at 25 to 1, I'm more than willing to have a little play on him at that price.
I was waiting for you to give us a 33 to 1 shot. I didn't think you tipped anything other than 33 to 1 shots.
No, sorry, I've let you. I'll come back next week with 33 to 1.
Thank you very much. I look forward to that in the Kimya, no doubt as well. Okay, my selection this week is going to be coming from the Mare's Chase. Sort of ummed and ahed about this selection for a while. I was torn between 2. I do like the way the market is sort of shaped up because I don't like Concertista, and she's taken quite a huge chunk out of the market. I think it's around 3 to 1. I just don't like the way she jumps fences, and I think a track like Cheltenham could catch her out. So as I say, I've been going back and forth between Mount Ida and Elimay. I've landed on the latter, Elimay. The pair have met twice, and they're sort of one apiece. If you were someone who likes to back 2 horses in a race, then I wouldn't put you off backing both of them. Now, Elimay beat Mount Ida last season by 2 lengths with giving her £6. The pair met again in January this year, and only half a length could separate them. I think Elimay was getting a couple pounds that day. So there really is nothing between them. I just think Elimay has a little bit more to give. She took a sizable step forward from her first run this season, which was absolutely abysmal, but a lot of Mullinses have disappointed first time out, and I think she's a lot better than that. The deciding factor was looking back at the Kimya last year. Mount Ida's jumping was just awful. Firstly, she dropped out the back of the TV really early on, and that was over 3 miles, and then consistently jumped right throughout. Since then, they've kept her to right-handed track. So I've lent towards Elimay on this one at 7 to 1. I'll just go for a win price on that. But yeah, second bet for me. And over to you, Jake, for your selection.
Yeah, so my followers will know I've already put up Grandji for the Mare's Novice Hurdle, but I am going to be having another play. This is because of the performance on Thursday, and it's Dinoblue for Willie Mullins. Now, this mare was I think she was installed about 2nd or 3rd favourite in the race. They had another one in there called La Prima Donna, who is in the same colours as Honeysuckle, and she was like a really short favourite. But the time the off went, they completely swapped in the market. Dinoblue got absolutely smashed in for JP, and she just won it like a really, really nice, smart mare. So obviously, Willie's won the first 5 renewals of the Mare's Novice. He didn't win it last year because Henry Bromhead won it with Tell Me Something Girl. His runners just kind of flopped, really. You know, he had a couple in there that were quite well fancied in the market, but just didn't run their races. But this time he's got an unreal bunch of mares. He's got obviously Grandji, I've mentioned. He's got Allegory Devassi, and she looks quite good as well, but she's been quite heavily supported in the market. She's now about 5 to 1, 9 to 2, which doesn't really entice me to have a bet at this stage. There's also Brandy Love, who also, again, looked good on her debut. Hard to know what she's achieved yet. Same with all of these, really. But Dinoblue, she just shaped, like, you know when you see one of those performances where you're like, wow, that's a smart horse. She just shaped like that. It was heavy ground to start off with, so you wouldn't expect a horse to go and win the way that she did. But she handled the conditions perfectly. She jumped really nicely, like she was making ground up at every single hurdle. She absolutely cruised into the race and just sprinted up the hill to go and win by 15 lengths. She got an RPR of 126 for that performance. If you compare that to Willie's other mares debutants who are prominent in the market, Grandji was also a 126 on debut. Allegory Devassi was 128 on debut, and Brandy Love was 131 on debut. So she's up there with them. She's a half sister to Blue Sari, and I just think she's got all the credentials to be a real threat to not only Grandji but everyone else in the race. I'm going to be having it's almost a cover bet, but it's also just a win only bet on her, 10 to 1. I think that's a very fair price. I think you could get 20 to 1 after the race, which I thought was ridiculous, but 10 to 1 is still a nice price. It's a hot division, granted, But I think that's why it's worth having, more than one play in it. And yeah, Dinoblue is going to be my second play in it for me, but obviously, the first one for the series. And yeah, I think she's just got a really nice profile for the race, and hopefully she goes and runs well next time. She could go to that grade 3 at Fairy House over 2 mile free furlong next. Wouldn't surprise me to see her go there, because that's where Willie sends most of his mares who are going to go to the final, to the Mares Novice. But it is also sometimes a poison chalice, because you do pick up a penalty if you win it. So if she does finish a good second, then it wouldn't be the end of the world. But yeah, we'll obviously have to wait and see on that front. But I think Dinoblue looks a really special mare.
If I'm not mistaken, this was one of your eye catchers, wasn't it, Dan?
It was, yeah. In a week that not many stood out because there wasn't that much quality racing. Yeah, she was very impressive indeed. I mean, look at that market though; it's absolutely crazy. I think Willie's got 5 of the 6 that are currently trading at 10 to 1 or less. It's just like pick which one. He's going to have issues jockeying them all up at this stage. It's going to be crazy, but I guess we're back to the normality of Willie Mullins dominating mares races, and long may it continue. It's the way it should be.
Okay,
Definitely.
That is going to wrap up episode 2. We'll be back obviously next week on Tuesday again. We look forward to it. If you guys have any questions you want to ask us, then please drop them down below. I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to say at all.
No, mate, not really. Just a big thank you for the support on the first episode, really. It seemed to go down really well. Everyone who watched and is continuing to watch, thank you, and I hope it proves beneficial when we get to the end of the 3rd week in March.
Lovely stuff. We'll see you guys in a week.